Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing real well, King, as I always say, but I mean it every time I say it. It's a good Wednesday morning when I get to be in conversation with you. So I'm good to go.
Likewise, I concur, and let this segue into my gratitude moment, what I'm grateful for, and that's my normal wake up each morning, the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have sound mind, have a mother who's alive and still able to be cognitive and coherent and have a great conversation, still feel her energy of love, and also roof over my head and the challenges I face in my life. Because again, through the challenges, I see growth, things to learn, and then finally, just opportunity to be on the show with you and to be grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to bring as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So, yeah, I'm grateful for my indoor plumbing, my electricity, which allows me to have a refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it, and just that basic access, indoor plumbing and that refrigerator that I get up every day and I have access to drinkable water and safe water and plenty of food, um, just is a huge blessing. But also to have a relatively healthy mind and body, as far as I can tell, and to have good friends locally and virtually, as you and I have this friendship across about, I don't know, 300 miles or so, whatever it is. Um, and even though we did have breakfast once in person, um, and yeah, really basic things I'm grateful for that I understand uh, make me privileged on this planet, because there are billions of people that don't have access to safe drinking water, electricity, and readily available fresh food. So I'm really grateful for those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before we get started, what's your spiritual energy number?
So I'm a 10. Today I just am a 10 and I choose it as well. So it's been a good morning, and I just love what I get to do, and I'm just 100% in, which means I'm a 10.
Absolutely. Well, I concur with that as well. I'm a 10. Like you said, I choose to do it. And I'll tell you, each morning I can wake up. And this morning I got up, I don't know if I remember if I mentioned this before, but I joined a 16-week boot camp, which requires, and I like the marketing that they did. They had a guy who basically advertised on Facebook, join a 16-week boot camp. You come, then the guy tells you, well, listen, it's a year membership, but if you come for 16 weeks, and you come 3 times a week, then we'll tear the contract up after 16 weeks. You don't have to worry about paying for any more months going forward, or you can pay for the full year now for like a 45% discount.
Yeah.
Or you pay monthly, but again, you can terminate the contract in 16 weeks. But if you don't come 3 times a week for 16 weeks, then you're obligated to stay for the full year. So I actually like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So they put the onus upon me if I want to be able to, get out of this in 16 weeks. So I decided to take it, realizing that I knew I needed to make a change health wise going forward. So long story short, I'm in my 5th week and I get up, 7 a.m. They have multiple workouts throughout the day, but I get up at 7 a.m., do that, and then go for a walk. And it's just really been something that I look at being for me to set my day, the tone, the energy that I'm going to be vibrating from, the frequency is going to be set by those actions. And again, that's my gift to myself. So I'm just feeling great based on that. That's why I'm a 10. Long story short, to say that also helps me bring that 10 up as well.
Yeah, great. I mean, the idea of taking care of the vehicle, the physical body and the mental and the spiritual, all that works together. So, really good. Yeah, I love that approach to marketing and membership as well. It makes sense to put some onus and get some rewards for a sense of responsibility and diligence, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of energy I'm vibrating on. But I'm interested to hear what's your topic, what you like to see us talk about today.
Yeah. So what we put up, I believe, on the preview was this, returning to what we spoke about last week, was this idea of the separation of church and state. Some folks who seem not to want church and state separated in the United States anymore, the idea of white Christian nationalism, which is a real thing. And the connection between, this idea of white Christian nationalism, which sounds like it's based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, what their agenda is in the United States, which is to make the United States a Christian nation, which the founders didn't choose, because the founders were a variety of religious beliefs, including, I think, a couple of atheists. And the turn I want to take today, and I'm going to put this in the context of our whole year and a half plus of what we've been talking about, is that the proponents of this, I'll call it a theocracy, and a week or so ago at the they're gathering the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. They actually spoke about it. They said, a couple of people stood up and said, we want to end democracy as you know it and make this a Christian nation. So it's not like it's some secret thing behind closed doors. They're saying it out loud. And I grew up Catholic, and so I have nothing against Jesus Christ. I have some things against what people have done with his message, but not with the message itself. But their candidate is Donald Trump. He was their candidate in 2016. He was their candidate in 2020, and he's their candidate again. And he's been indicted across a variety of issues for both civil and criminal cases. And more specifically, the case against him in Manhattan, where he's accused of falsifying business records, 34 counts against him of falsifying business records, in order to affect the outcome of the 2016 election, because he was being sued by some women he had affairs with, one woman who alleged he had fathered her child and he paid her off, and he hid money and made believe that payoff money was actually part of his legal fees. And it's other things there. There's 34 counts. I'm not going to get into all of them. But his attorneys filed, and I'm going to tie this all together, I promise. His attorneys filed, I think yesterday or the day before, in Manhattan court, to have certain witnesses and evidence disallowed from the trial. And one of them is to prevent Michael Cohen, who was Trump's, basically, to use the language of organized crime and movies, was his cleaner. Basically, he's the guy that came in when Trump got into a mess and took care of the legal financial things. And if he had to, he would threaten people. He didn't kill anybody or beat people up, but he did it from a legal financial standpoint. And when he was indicted, he basically turned and ran away from Trump. So he's like a hero now to some people. He's still somewhat of a thug, but he's going to testify in the trial. And Trump's attorneys want to keep him from testifying, which they're not going to succeed at that motion, because the whole idea of the trial is to put all the evidence in front of the jury. He also wants to keep some of the evidence about the hush money he paid out of the trial, pointing to the money that was supposed to be legal fees, but in fact went to Stormy Daniels, who was a prostitute that he frequented. And there's 34 counts. So what I want to talk about in the larger context of healing America's narratives, which is what we've been talking about for going on for almost 2 years now, and specifically the shadow of the United States, those things that we deny about the country. And I'll just name them briefly here and bring it back to Christian nationalism and Donald Trump. But the shadow of the country, the things we deny, there are at least 9 of them that you and I have been talking about: ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. Now, we can take any 3 or 4 of those and hook them on to Donald Trump's history as an adult with no problem. He's ignorant of the Constitution. He's arrogant about how he treats other people. He has shown evidence of bigotry in how he talks about other groups, from Mexicans to disabled Americans. He has a sense of excess. He had gold toilet seats in his building in New York City, and other things. So what I want to talk about is the connection / disconnection between this candidate, this man, who has 4 lawsuits against him. The most immediate one now is, 34 counts, felony counts against him. He is effectively the Republican candidate. He won the Republican primaries in Super Tuesday yesterday. I don't know how many states that is exactly. He has never shown any evidence of being a practicing Christian or any familiarity with the Bible. And yet he is the candidate for those who want to turn the United States into a theocracy, a Christian nation. So I want to get into the various dissonances there, the inconsistencies. And it's actually very complex. But one of the reason I want to talk about it is there's increasingly more evidence from good journalists that many people who support Donald Trump support him out of ignorance. And when I say ignorance now, I don't mean that as an insult. I'm ignorant in a lot of the aspects of how artificial intelligence works. I'm ignorant in most of nuclear physics. I'm ignorant in the depths of Jewish mysticism. We all have our ignorance. So it just means not knowing something. And when people find out that he paid hush money to a prostitute before the 2016 election, when they found out how much he really knew about what was going on during the January 6th insurrection in 2021, as opposed to what they were fed by Christian broadcasting stations across America. There are over 3,000 of them. And for many Americans, that's how they get their news. And they're fed a very, very narrow view of the country and of Donald Trump. When they actually do get access to the information, those people who are in fact acting in good faith and just didn't know changed their view of him. And so this ties in the media. It ties in people who want to make the United States not a democratic country anymore. Donald Trump seems to be one of them. And the idea of Christianity, I would argue an unhealthy iteration of Christianity, using Christianity as a political tool. That's actually very, very dangerous as we complete our 248th year as a country. So I understand. I know that could be the most I've thrown out on the table to begin one of these conversations, but I'll put you on the spot now and just say, so, what did you hear? What stands out to you? What direction do you want to take this conversation in?
Well, again, I definitely want to, say thank you for coming up with a wonderful topic and really setting the context and, tying it into the need of America to begin to heal its narratives, And I think what's really interesting is that, and I've said this before, that Donald Trump is someone who's come along at a time when timing is perfect for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. A post-Obama presidency, and because the country is shifting into a direction of change. And of course, there's energy around not wanting to change. And it became more obvious and apparent and urgent to fight the change once Obama got elected. And so I think Trump came in at a time that was perfect for that, because folks was looking for someone to come up and just be the face of what they feel would push the agenda along and help them sustain, because, they say conservatism, conserve what they currently have as well. And again, it's not referring to everybody who's conservative, but the ones who obviously, that you laid out, the white Christian nationalists. I also hear what stayed in my mind was how powerful the energy of hate is. Like that's a very powerful energy that if you can get folks caught up in that at the same time, seeing a victim and adopting a victim type connection to the hate. That's a powerful motivator to get people to act, to get people to even not go beyond a deeper thought. Because if I'm in alignment with you right there off those two things, where I feel as though I don't like the direction the country is going in, and I'm also a victim to what's happening, which is going to adversely affect me and then generations after me, I got to do something about it. And Donald Trump just happened to be the person who's willing to let his stuff be aired and then stand with that to say, well, it is who I am. Deal with it. And I attribute my own personal, and I know I can do a lot of research to back it up, but just on a surface level, Donald Trump really just took on the personage of a WWE character and became the heel. And wrestling kind of proved that people can be attracted to the heel. You know, the heel is telling you he's bad, I want to do evil, but you still like him because he's charismatic. And that may be funny as well. And you can connect with the heel on certain things. So now you find yourself rooting for the heel. Now Trump is tapping it, combining that hate and the victimness to it. So when you're talking, that's what I'm really seeing and seeing going in the country, because obviously the tone has shifted from a society that was willing to be outright bigotry. If you look at the 70s and the 80s, like I said, from shows I would watch, I can watch Archie Bunker and see the bigotry there, and that was comedy around that. And I get the comedy around it because I'm a person who is secure in who they are. And I don't see myself as a victim, so I can laugh at things and not take it as an insult because I don't wear, my feelings on my sleeves like some others do. So that's kind of what I'm hearing, and everything you laid out is that. So in order to make that next change, we have to go through this period of really pulling out the people, like you said, that CPAC, they're willing to go ahead and just be vocal with it. It's no longer even going to be something that's done behind closed doors, which is good. Because now they're saying whoever this message resonates with, it's time for us to build. So it's really pushing things towards a climax. It's almost like a movie. We're in the second act and getting ready for the third act, which is going to be the election. And who wins the election is going to dominate the third act. Right. One of the things I'm glad that happened from a legal context was the Supreme Court striking down the idea that Colorado and some other states can remove Trump from the ballot. I think that was a wrong precedent to set if states were going to do that. I think that because now they can shift that and find a reason to do it where more conservative states can say, I don't want this progressive candidate on the ballot, and come up with whatever reason that may be. So I'm glad they took it out of the state's hands and said, no, federally, we got to make sure that every candidate that one party has nominated has to be on the ballot in those states. So that's kind of what I'm going to share with you is I'm feeling the fact that I want to close with this. I was thinking about this today while I was walking, and I want to make sure that I quote it correctly. But Stevie Wonder has a song called Love's in Need of Love Today. And I'm not going to read the whole song, but I just want to read the chorus because I think the chorus is powerful words of wisdom. And that's where I feel is where we should be on this kind of vibe of attention. Basically, so the chorus goes, love's in need of love today. Don't delay. Send yours in right away. Hate's going round, breaking many hearts. Stop it, please, before it's gone too far. So that to me is kind of where we need to be. And like I said, I just feel that encapsulates how to deal with all the hate energy that's going on right now.
Yeah, and I appreciate thanks for sharing the Stevie Wonder lyric. I appreciate your zeroing in on the hate piece. I just want to comment quickly on the Supreme Court too. Because I agree. I mean, people who don't like Donald Trump and wanted him off the ballot, which, if he was never on a ballot again, I'd be happy, because he has the ability to do some real damage. But in fact, you have to look at the bigger picture and the precedent it would set. So same thing with freedom of speech. If as soon as somebody has the right to start saying, well, no, you can't say that, other than threatening speech, which is not protected by the First Amendment. Same thing with the ballot. If a state can just decide, no, you can't be on it, then depending on who's in power, they can silence conservatives, they can silence progressives or whoever. So I agree with you 100%. Where the Supreme Court kicked the can a bit, they're going to have to, address this in April now. But they kicked the can around the immunity question. Is the president immune if he's an insurrectionist? Is he immune from prosecution because he's a president? That's got kicked down for over like a month and a half. So the Supreme Court, I don't know what their reasoning for that was, but they're gonna have to either say a president can do whatever he wants, or they're gonna have to say nobody's above the law. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but the legal scholars that I've read, the attorneys general and the district attorneys, all pretty much agree on that. No matter what the language is, those are the two options. Either a president is above the law or he's not. And if the Supreme Court finds out that there is, in fact, somebody, a president, who can do whatever he wants, that would be one example of how the democracy that we've believed in doesn't really exist, or is changing in a really bad direction. So the one thing we haven't tied into the conversation yet, which I think is really important, especially around, because you mentioned hate, and I want to come back to that, is developmental worldview. We've been using that shorthand of the earliest worldview we have as young children is, when we're toddlers, really. When we're infants, we're just kind of undifferentiated. We are just receive whatever the world gives us, and we depend on our parents or our caregivers to keep us alive because we have no agency ourselves other than crying. All right, what we do is we eat and we excrete. And sleep. That's basically it. But when we get in, 1.5 or 2 years old, we begin to get language and we get to learn how to walk, and we realize we're individuals in a healthy way. We learn how to say no, and so it all becomes about us. It's all about me as an individual. Graduation from that is it becomes about. I just said this inadvertently. It becomes a group-centric view. So I care about not just myself, but my family or my friends or my school or my community. And again, we've spoken about this many times, but I want to make sure we put it out there with some detail before we apply it. Group centrism is more complex and more inclusive than me-centrism. Because as soon as you add one other person to your relationships, everything changes. Whether you fall in love with somebody, or whether you bring a child into the world, or you go to work and you have colleagues or whatever it is, there's more than one involved. All right, it just gets more complex, even though it's more inclusive. The next step up, beyond groups, is human centrism, species centrism. Oh, we're all in this together. Even if you're Republican and I'm a Democrat, even if I'm a woman and you're a man, even if I'm black and you're white, even if whatever the differences might be, we're all human. And can we love each other at that level? And then finally, the biggest step is it's about not just humans, but about everything on the planet itself, nature, the oceans, the fish, the animals, the flora, the fauna, all of that. And very few people live there. So when it comes down to hate, and there is definitely hate. I mean, I wish there weren't, but the way people talk about others now, if they're not really hateful, for some reason, they think it's beneficial to make believe they are in public. The hate and the lying and the desire to weaken democracy all exists in that group-centric worldview. It's an us against them worldview. It's an unhealthy version of group centrism. It's a Democrat versus Republican. It's conservative versus liberal. White Christian nationalism against anything else. And as long as enough Americans, and the vast majority of adults in America, it is true about it, are strongly enmeshed in a group-centric worldview, it's easier to hate the other side. Having another side isn't a problem. It's how we are in relationship with the other side. We can talk about, in a healthy way, us and them, us with them. But generally speaking, domestically and internationally, it's us against them. And that's where the hate can really grow. There's the founders of the Council for National Policy, which was founded in the early 1980s. We spoke about it last week. They learned three basic principles. That's kind of the loosely governs a lot of what goes on with Christian nationalists, with the far-right conservatives, with the attempts to make America, a free market with no government interference, leaning more towards a theocracy, being anti-abortion, against a woman's right to choose, pro-gun rights, and basically against gay marriage. Those are their big parts of their platform. But they wrote years ago that they learned three things about politics. One is that you don't have to be right to win. Another way to say that is the side that's right, quote unquote right, doesn't necessarily win. The side that wins has the best activists and leaders. And the best activists and leaders win when they have the best political technology and organizations. So three things there. All right. I'm gonna paraphrase it. We don't care if we're right or not. We just want to win. It's us against them. Two, we can win if we have the best activists and the best leaders. And the best activists and leaders can win if they have the best political technology, which means two things, basically: communication and organization. So how do we communicate, and what's the organization around all of it? The various groups who want to see Christianity in charge, which includes white Christian nationalists. Not everybody who's pro-Christian is a white Christian nationalist. That's a unique group. But they play that game. They don't care if they're right. They really are well led, and they have lots of activists. They train people from high school forward. And they, in 2016 and 2020 elections, they were really well organized and had great communication systems. Now, they lost in 2020 because of things like COVID, because people got to see Trump and what he actually did as president for 4 years. So a lot of Republicans left the party, kind of the moderates who were more or less sane, and we could say true social and fiscal conservatives in many ways. But it all comes down to hating the other side. Let me rephrase that. A big part of the strategy, not that it all comes down to that, but a big part of the strategy is hating the other side. And one way to make sure that the masses continue to hate the other side is to limit the amount of information they have access to. And that's what over 3,000 Christian broadcasting stations do across the country. Not that every one of them does that, but there are thousands of them, and many people in Middle America get their news from there, as many people on the coasts get their news from more liberal-leaning media, and Fox News as well. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, et cetera. So how do we bridge the gap, get people interested in what's right as opposed to what we need to do to win at all costs, and to bring the idea of truth and evidence back into the conversation, as opposed to what Kellyanne Conway famously said as the White House spokeswoman some years ago, that we provide people with alternative facts, which basically means you don't understand what a fact is. So it's complex, and no one I know that I've read or listened to has all the answers to really resolve this political, social, religious, legal mess that we face right now. Not meaning to sound so pessimistic, but it's true.
You know, I don't really see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I really don't see there being any resolution to it without some form of conflict. And the reason I say that is because it's not based on justice. So it's not like at some point one side is going to say, "Okay, I'm just being wrong. You're right." You know, that shifts over toward your line of thinking. It's based off, to your point, I'm right, you're wrong. And it doesn't really matter if the world sees me as right. I feel I'm right. And I'm going to stand on that, basically until I lose, because my rightness is based upon what I feel is owed to me. And that's just as simple as it's going to be. So that's why I feel is that, and I hate to be pessimistic, I don't see it ever really being solved because that's the crux of the matter. The second thing is I really look at the fact that, it's funny when you talk about the behaviors of the way Christian nationalists. And it reminds me of a quote Gandhi attributed to him as saying is that, and this is something I agree with, that's why I remember the quote, is that I love Jesus, but I don't like you Christians because your Christians are so unlike Jesus, right? Or he said Christ. He says, I love Christ, but your Christians are so much not like Christ. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like you read about Jesus, yes, if you have any love in your heart, and you're definitely a person that sees himself as a growing human being, you're going to love the teachings of Jesus. It's just people who represent to say, well, we've adopted Jesus's ideology, we're going to imply it, doesn't necessarily behave according to what Jesus taught. And that becomes very apparent. And it's not just white Christian nationalists, it's just pretty much, I've seen Black Christians and still don't see the behavior that matches the rhetoric that they're trying to espouse. But at the end of the day, I really think it comes down to you as an individual, again, seeing yourself from a context of, I got to remove myself from, as you talk about the group centric, I got to remove myself, my identity should not be linked to the group centric. It should be linked to me becoming more fully human. And one of my identities can be part of the group centric, but it shouldn't be what I let control my behaviors and, more importantly, my principles that I set forth in my life as far as what governs my actions, those principles. So if your principles are steeped in the group centric that you discussed, then it's always going to be slanted for the betterment of that group, whether the group is morally right in their actions or their thoughts or not. It's as long as the group wins at all costs. And finally, I just want to add this to living in a world where hate is let me shift this. I just want to make this part about the media. The media, to your point, controls the messaging that goes out so much so, and the media has always been so powerful that even Henry Ford understood this. Henry Ford, as rich as he was from the Ford Automotive, he knew he had his own community of workers, and it was so vast, such an intricate network, and they worked so many hours that they had very little time to really go at and get media, that he created his own news network and his own written news network as well as TV news network for his workers to watch. And he was able to feed them information that he wanted them to have. And that's why to this day, Henry Ford was able to completely control the narrative about him, even though he was a Nazi sympathizer and sent money to the Nazi party. That's not the first thing people think about when they think about Henry Ford at all. Most people don't even know that about Henry Ford. That's kind of like, well, that's down the long list of things about him. But what you look at him as an innovator, as a genius, as a creator of the industry line, assembly line, I'm sorry. That's the image. So that's power of what media can do for you. If you have the money and the resources and a plan in which to go about getting your message out there.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it actually reminds me, the quote you used about Gandhi and the difference between Christ and Christ's followers. After the September 11th attacks, this is tied in with what we're speaking about, but Muhammad Ali, who was just brilliant in so many ways, besides what he did in the ring, but just as a human being and a thinker and a speaker. But some reporters stuck a microphone in his face and said, "How do you feel as a Muslim that that followers of your religion did what happened to this country, what happened on September 11th?" And immediately his response was, "Well, how do you feel as a," he assumed that the person was Christian. He said, "How do you feel as a Christian that people of your faith committed the Holocaust?" And it's like, so it's but I use that example to piggyback on the example you used of Gandhi and Christ. It's this idea of nuance and the ability to recognize this me-centrism, this us-centrism, this all of us centrism. Because one of the researchers that I base that shorthand on, that me, us, all of us, all that is shorthand, arguably the primary researcher who really was at the forefront of adult developmental research, Robert Keegan, from Harvard. In his language, his third level of development is known as the socialized mind. Right. The first level is more in childhood, and the second level is also kind of like late childhood or middle childhood. But the socialized mind is the mind at which most adults live their lives out. A majority. After that is, and this is the language he used, the self-authoring mind. So hear that difference from socialized. I think I'm an individual. I think I'm thinking for myself, but I'm not aware of all of the cultural givens, what Thomas Merton called the anonymous authority of the collectivity, what Ken Wilber called the vast intersubjective network. I've just been socialized to think I'm thinking for myself, but I'm really just repeating what the culture gives me. All right. And that's the problem with the non-thinking Christians or Muslims or Jews or whatever religion that don't reflect. And it's only when we grow, develop, when we realize, oh, I don't really believe that. If I really look at my own experience of the world and what I was given, I don't really believe that. And then we can begin to self-author, to write our own life, to choose to become more fully human. And the one beyond that, where very few people get, is called self-transforming mind, where we know how to actually be, besides writing our own story, we can actually transform how we view it. And that's a whole different thing, which we shouldn't, there aren't enough of us, who live in that space. That's not the problem right now. Just to be able to see, oh, I'm stuck in this group centrism, this socialized mind, and I don't really believe all that. And as you say, you want to be around people who are learners and growers. That's not exactly how you say it, I know, but in a socialized mind, you're not interested in growing and learning. You just take what's given to you. And basically foreground and background are the same. It's all just this big story that you're part of, and you have no authorship in it. That's a really hard way to live. But you don't know it's a hard way to live until you can look back on it. Say, wow. I mean, I used to believe that. Who am I now if what I always believed is not true? That's a really scary place.
Mm.
That's what development forces us to do. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, because I can begin then to self-author. And I can choose then, and the natural move becomes, if you're healthy, to see all humans as your brothers and sisters, to become more human-centric. And it gets harder to hate then. You will disagree with people. There will be some people you just don't like as much and not as much fun to be around. Welcome to the human club. You don't have to be best friends with all of them, but you're not going to hate them or think it's a good idea to kill them or hurt them in any way. And there's no magic formula that invites people into that other than exemplars for it. Oh, John Lewis. Oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Oh, this, Dr. King. Oh, Gandhi. Oh, whoever. How could I be more like that person? Pick one who's doing good in the world. But there's not an automatic magic bullet, and development tends to take, to really move from one developmental level to another, tends to take months or years. Like you don't suddenly wake up one morning and say, "Oh man, I went to bed. I was me-centric. I woke up and I'm group-centric today." It doesn't work. It doesn't work there. You can move through it more quickly because of grace or trauma, perhaps, but you don't get to skip a stage or suddenly wake up and have it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, I've been studying personal growth and personal development for over 35 years. Yeah. So, of course, my mind is just fixed in that thought process of only seeing growth in my actions and only seeing love. And I can't even fathom how folks who don't think that way. So it's easy. It's like I was talking about this to a friend of mine, how trainers who come up with programs for people to work out don't understand a lot of times psychology and human behaviors. Mm. Like, in other words, you say, we're going to start a 16-week program, which I want you to come 3 times a week. So I want to change the habit of getting up early, which is a new habit, work out, something you don't want to do. So you got to get up early, do something you don't want to do. Then I'm going to tell you that you also instantaneously going to change your diet. It's like most people are not going to do that for 16 weeks. That's human behavior tells you that's too much change for a person to make in their lives, right? Because you got to uplift pretty much everything. Because everything centers around your energy level and your eating. And if you're adding new things to it, it takes away from what you believe in the beginning. It's going to take away from your energy level. And then you have to change your diet. So my point I'm getting at is that along the journey of becoming more fully human, to your point, you don't just wake up and do that. You have to really, I believe, tell yourself first that you see the value in doing it. We need to see more examples of that. We look at the folks who, you lifted up, the John Lewises and Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world, the Mother Teresa's, individuals who put themselves in sacrifice for the many. They pretty much lived hard lives if you compare and look at their lives, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want Martin Luther King Jr.'s life at all. You want the success and the admiration that came along with it. Same thing with John Lewis. You don't want to get your head cracked the way his head got cracked and how he had to deal with that for the rest of his life. So there's a consequence to choosing that kind of behavior, even Bob Marley. Once he found out he had cancer, instead of him saying, I'm just going to say, well, it was me, I'm going to just see myself as a messenger and start looking at the greater good. What can I get out here and show the world? How quickly can I do it? Let me stay committed to that particular path and not even think about what can I do to make my life longer. Now, of course, there was actions and behaviors he tried, but that wasn't his most dominating thought. So to really choose that path to say, I'm going to be fully human and I'm going to live a more disciplined, committed life, you have to be willing to shut out all the noise that comes from the media and just the world, your friends who, at the same time, if you don't watch sports, are going to bring you to sports. Nothing. It's like I always laugh at the liberal talk shows that come on at night that profess to hate Trump, but Jimmy Kimmel gives me everything Trump says every single day I watch his monologue. It's like, so even though I had no idea what Trump said that or spoke at this particular rally, you just brought me up to speed on what he said, what he's going to do, showed me a clip of it. So you're keeping me just as much into Trump than Fox News is. You're just putting your spin on it, but yet still you're giving me Trump as a way of me watching your show, right? You feeding off the energy of, I just want to get my message out. So I'm going to use someone who I claim to hate. I'm going to talk about them every single day. And that to me shows the irony and the power behind the movement, where they're going to talk about you, talk about who you claim to hate to get your tribe to watch you, to get people to resonate with that. And lastly, I want to share something with you I came up with because I'm a connector. I advocate for people building their own tribes. So building a tribe of people who also want to be fully human once you made the decision, however you got there, to say, I decided that just being this group-centric identity is not doing well for my soul. I may be financially doing well, my career may be well, but I'm not happy with my family. My wife and I are not getting along. My kids and I don't get along. I feel stressed out from work. So that's how you're navigating your life, that kind of life. I say you still should build your own tribe. So what I came up with was what I call my identity statement. A statement that you say that sets the context of who you are and what you stand for from the very beginning. Because it's either going to repel most people from you, or it's going to attract your tribe to you. So that statement for me is an example. I say, when I meet you for the first time, I am a spiritual being committed to becoming more fully human. Along this journey, I will be growth-minded and constantly seeking to connect and engage the energy of love. That's who I am. So that's my statement of identity when I meet someone. And either, like I said, it's going to create curiosity and you're going to ask me questions about it, or it's going to be like, I heard love in there. I heard spiritual being. So if those words are going to be off-putting to you, then that should push you away, and which is good because I don't want you in my life no more than you want me in your life. And that's what I'm talking about, the importance of alignment in that context.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Wow, there's a lot there. One thing you said about you when you began with the change factor, when you go to the trainer and they want you to do all this stuff in 16 weeks and it's too much. There's actually a model for change that's used a lot in health coaching, and I haven't thought of it. I haven't been working in that for a while, but I can just because I think it's really important, and it's big and it's based in research. And in terms of, if you're a health coach, this is the context that comes in. Very often, if you're a health coach, a doctor or a nurse might send a client to you because you need to stop smoking or go on a diet, or change how you eat, or actually whatever it is, they think something would be beneficial. So they send you to a coach. And I think it's called the trans theoretical model of change, but don't quote me on that because I haven't looked at it in a while. But it's something like this. I apologize to the model makers if I slay this, but it's really relevant because we're speaking about changing people's views and changing people's minds. So the first stage, kind of like a pre-stage, is called pre-contemplation. I'm not even thinking about changing. I'm in my own way of doing things. Change isn't even on my horizon. That's pre-contemplation. If that's where you are, and somebody says, okay, change your diet, you're just not going to do any of that. The second step is contemplation. I'm not making any change yet, but I'm thinking about it in good faith. All right. That's a little bit, you can work a little bit with that. So maybe you give somebody try this little step. All right. The third step, I think, is changing, where I've actually, okay, I've thought about it. I'm going to start working at it now, and I'm going to work at changing whatever the change happens to be. All right. This is where it gets a little bit blurry for me. The fourth step is something like, I don't think it ever gets to changed, like you're completely done. I don't think it ever actually gets there. But the next step is something like maintenance, where you've made enough progress where now you want to maintain what it is you've changed, so you don't lose it. You don't, revert back to how it was. Then there's one more step, which I forget. But that's actually, your example of that with the trainers. If a trainer doesn't know about how people change, you could be an expert in diet, in muscle building, in aerobic workout, and all that stuff. But if he or she is not, has no awareness of how people are open to change, they're going to probably, help a few people who are right in that sweet spot, ready to change, but not really help people who are pre-contemplative or just contemplative. So it's, there's so much we need to know about each other. So trying to change anybody involuntarily is a fool's errand. So, I mean, I'm a coach, you connect with people. I don't change people. I don't pretend to be able to change people. I just have conversations with people who feel stuck. And the conversations tend to invite them into viewing things differently in their own lives. But I never tell anybody what to do so they can change. You can't do it. It doesn't work.
Right.
So that's even true as a parent. You don't say, the worst thing you say to a kid is, you have to stop doing that. No, I don't. And even loving parents say that, and loving kids still resist it. So there are different ways to open up the possibility of change. Besides, I wish I had known that when I was younger. I didn't know
that. Most change comes from my understanding of it, emulation. If I see something, I'm going to try to emulate that. Like how many people changed their basketball game because of Michael Jordan, the way he played, which it would be more realistic for people to change their game like Larry Bird than Michael Jordan, because most people are not going to have the athletic ability that Michael Jordan had. So no matter how much you wanted to change your game to that, only a few people, Kobe, can do that. Then you look at folks who, Stephen Curry, changed his game, basketball, and now that whole game now is shooting threes, which most people say they don't like the way basketball is played now because everything is drive in, kick out to the three, and there's no more traditional basketball that people grew up with in the 70s and 80s. And I'm kind of torn between, so I saw that, but by the same token, I'm enjoying this. So I don't know which one I really lay on the side of, other than to say that I've learned that one thing about when you really become more fully human and you really put yourself on the path of, as you said, becoming beyond that, to the point where you become one with nature, as I believe. You start seeing nature and hearing the messaging and the language that nature speaks to you every day. Once you tune into that frequency, it makes it hard for me to understand how someone can be an atheist. I'm not saying that from a judgmental context. I'm just saying it from a thought process, because my point is, throw away all of the man talk that's in any religion that man is throwing his agenda. And you just walk out and look at nature and the changing of the seasons and the cycle of the days and just the animals mating and then understanding how ecosystems work, that if you, like, as annoying as a fly is to us, that if we were to kill all the flies, how they can destroy the ecosystem now, because the bacteria that flies break down, and then the frogs eat the flies, and then the frogs need to be into the ecosystem and environment, how all that's going to be impacted by that. How can you believe that? Just thinking, oh, that just coincidentally happens together. It's like that's the perfect uniform transitions or change on a daily basis has to be, as you say, managed by something of a greater being. And then when you see that and you recognize that everything changes, then finally, I just want to make this point on this, is that then you also see within nature how certain animals within the food chain, deer, elk, there's a lion or a wolf or an animal that can kill it. And that's not fair. Nature's not fair. You can't look at nature and say, well, that's not fair. And when people make that statement in real life, this is not fair and not being treated fairly, again, you got to look at nature. It's not about being fair. It's been understanding how to live within this universal world. So I kind of appreciate the end of that, but that's kind of what energy I'm vibrating at this level on.
Yeah. And I can't help going back to how you started with the changes in basketball. And I was just reflecting, when I was a kid first playing basketball, you'd get yelled at if you dribbled the ball, if you tried to dribble the ball between your legs or behind your back. That was showboating, and it's not part of the game if you really want to play. And then, maybe Bob Cousy did it, and then you had Maravich and different people over the years. And that was back when I say Cousy, that was the majority of the NBA was still white guys, right? Now, you can't make a high school basketball team as a guard, if you're a center, perhaps there aren't any centers left. But if you're going to handle the ball, you can't make a team without being able to go behind your back and through your legs really well. It's a basic move. It's part of the game now. So that's another example of, I could say evolution or development, maybe, but definitely change, because the game has definitely changed. And I agree with you that some aspects of it I like and some aspects I don't like. But either I can come to terms with things as they are. That's what the game is. You want to watch it or not. That's what they're going to be doing.
Right.
Or not. And that's our obligation. You're going to resist reality? I don't want it to be that way. Well, good luck, because that's how it is. And you want to try to change it? Well, go ahead. Try to change the way professional and college and high school basketball has changed, or whatever, pick a sport, or whatever it is. So, we could go on and that for a while, but we better not.
Well, yeah, we reached a part of the show where now we've laid out the solution. I mean, we laid out the situation. Now we also want to talk about what some possible solutions are, definitely the steps people can actually implement in their lives. So what do you see as, what are some takeaways that you can take from this week's episode?
So one big part of it, I think, because of how we began talking about democracy in the United States, separation of church and state, we went off on some tangents for sure. But I would say if you really are not sure about that, if perhaps you think if the United States should be a Christian nation, do some research. And I would suggest going to a library, not just going online. And if you go online, find out what your sources are. Like, don't trust Hillsdale College, because they're funded by white Christian nationalists, and they have an agenda. It's not really a place where you can, get open information, and other places like that. But read about the founders. Read about the religious beliefs of those who signed the Declaration of Independence and who wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Learn about that, because they purposely made sure it wasn't a Christian nation. That's one. More contemporary, whatever your chosen source of news is, however you get information about what's going on in the world, balance that with at least one, preferably two other sources, and see how they match up. And if they don't match up, get curious about where the truth might actually lie. In other words, get more than just one source, and don't get scared if what you believed in may not be true, because that's a great opportunity for growth. And that's for anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody in the middle. Not that I don't think they're all equal, so don't get me wrong. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to, try to have conversations that invite people to think other than how they typically do.
All right. Definitely thank you for sharing that. And as we always like to do as we wrap our show up, by giving an example of someone who, whether in the past or in the present, are exhibiting the fully human characteristics. And I'll allow you to go first. If you, who's the person you have that you just right there, top of your head, that you're like, I gotta say this person. So the person stands out to me the most.
For those of you being on this podcast for the first time, the reason we're laughing is because sometimes we're not ready to share it. And whenever King says to me, I want you to go first, that means he doesn't have his person yet. And he knows I don't have mine. So, well, actually, I'm going to go back to somebody I mentioned already, and I've probably used him in the past, but we have a it's okay to repeat clause in our contract.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned, Muhammad Ali earlier in his response when somebody wanted to blame him or get his opinion because he was a Muslim for the September 11th attacks and how he responded. But over the course of his life, I mean, he was this great example of developing in many ways, but developing in public. So you got to see him as a young fighter, boxer who was immensely gifted. Could be I would argue he was the most gifted fighter when he first began as anybody. I could argue for Tyson too, because different kind of fighter, but he had some real gifts too. But Ali just, no pun intended, he rarely got punched as a young fighter. Like people couldn't hit him. And again, he was about 6'4" and as quick as welterweights. He was a heavyweight. And then he refused to go to Vietnam as a conscientious objector. And he didn't get to fight for 3 or 4 years in his prime. And he came back out and began to fight again. And in between, before that happened, he converted from, being born into Christianity to Islam. And he was known for the rest of his life as somebody who was the most recognized face on the planet and who was a real kind of, what's the word I would use? He was basically a proselytizer for peace. He was a guy that just believed in peace. He was honest. He didn't take shit from anybody, and he was really smart and articulate. And unfortunately, he developed Parkinson's, and so suffered a bit, but still kept his sense of humor right up to the end of his public life. So I just have always had a lot of respect for him. And I was like in 7th or 8th grade when he converted to Islam. I remember being a kid, and one of the other kids in school said, "You hear what Cassius Clay did? Changed his name." We didn't know what the hell that meant or anything back when we were kids. So anyway, Muhammad Ali.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with Rita Marley, Bob Marley's wife, the woman he married, I should say. And the reason I say Rita Marley is because once you really learn about Bob Marley, you really see his story. I mean, really learn his story. You hear things about the fact that he was a womanizer and he had 12 other kids. I think 12 kids total, and he had, I believe, the other 9 outside of his marriage with Rita. Is that she, and out of her own words, said, I became more of his manager and his protector. Like she would go to the hotel rooms because he had his own room when he was on tour. She was obviously a singer of one of his background singers in this band. And when they went on tour, he had his own room, and he would call her to come get the other women out of his room. And I'm not saying this because she tolerated him infidelity, but she saw that he was much more than just a regular man. She saw that this person has a message and a purpose, a higher purpose for being here on this earth. And I'm not going to just tie him down to the expectations of a marriage and fatherhood, which a lot of people would judge her on. But look at the impact that he really had on the world as a result of her being the way she did and making that sacrifice and making that choice. So to me, that's a growth when a person gets beyond the ego of saying that he's not here for me and he should be here for his family. He had a message for the world. He had a message that, and I challenge anybody to do this. I call it the 30-day Bob Marley challenge. That if you watch a documentary about him and then commit to listen to a different song by Bob Marley for 30 days, I guarantee you're going to change the way you feel about him and how you start to see the world. And for me, for a person to have that kind of power, and it's not through hate, it's through the power of love that he was really advocating in peace, to your point about Muhammad Ali, that, and it's the worldwide figure.
Yeah.
So to me, I want to lift her up as someone who chose not to be selfish and realize that the greater good was to just support Bob Marley and all his creative endeavors, even though as a human being, he's going to have his faults that we may disagree with, but he still kept his message pure and never let that message go away. So I just want to give her respect, because not most people, both women or men in the same situation, would have chose to be more about themselves and not about the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
And thank you for the show. As we wrap up, we went a little bit over because we just kind of feel that energy, and that's what a great discussion would do. At the same time, that's what I believe that I enjoy doing the show with you, because I learned so much each show. I definitely want you to share with me offline about you talked about 5 different levels of change, and definitely something I want to look at and learn, because I believe that's something I want to begin to, as a connector, apply not only in my life, but make sure I'm holding myself to that growth standard. But at the same time, I'm always looking for ways to identify possible connections and how to make those decisions really quickly, so you don't really waste a lot of time with people. But at the end, this has been a great show. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully we are creating something in you that makes you at least interested in learning more about what it takes to become more fully human, or interested in learning what's the benefit and value of it. And each Wednesday at 10 a.m., we'll hope you tune into our show so we can at least align you with the path. So until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., I want to thank everybody for being a part of our show, listening, and encourage you to engage with us online. Thank you. Thank you, Reggie.
You're welcome. My pleasure.